Good afternoon and welcome. Thank you for joining us. It's been a little bit of time since I've been on this side of the camera, and I'm actually joined today, well, virtually, not in the studio, by Sarah Kempfer, who's been an AE with Synergy for how long, Sarah? How long have you been with us now?
Been about 3 years.
Wow. Time really does fly. It's great to finally have you on the webinar team. It's long overdue. This month, we are going to be talking about navigating modern risk, but specifically as it pertains to disaster preparedness and recovery. And this has been kind of an evolving conversation over years, and we really are excited to kind of use hurricane season, right? Not everybody's favorite thing to think about, but an opportunity to think about how we are preparing for and able to recover from disasters on an ongoing basis. So I'm going to kick it over to Sarah to talk a little bit about Synergy and her time with us, and then we'll jump right into talking about this very exciting topic for midsummer.
Awesome. Thanks, Adrian. Hi, everyone. My name's Sarah Kempfer. It's great to be joining you this afternoon. For those of you who are new or haven't joined us for a while, I thought I'd kick us off by giving a quick background on who Synergy Technical is. So we were founded in 2011. We're coming up on our 15-year anniversary, which we're very excited about. From the beginning, we've been driven to the cloud. So we're a cloud-first organization. We have been Microsoft Security Partner of the Year. We're one of Microsoft's top 10 licensing partners and one of top 25 nationally managed partners. So we work with industries across the globe in many different verticals. So we have a large nonprofit practice. We work with energy corporations, manufacturing, retail, healthcare, banking, legal, and we have many different areas of technology that we focus on. We have a large security practice. We have a managed services practice, and we have a very strong technical team and Power Apps. And newly over the past 18 to 24 months, we're very excited to be starting our AI practice as well. So Adrian, for the purposes today, you touched a little bit on it for hurricane season, but why are we talking about BCDR now?
So I didn't actually realize that last year was the 25th anniversary of one of the most devastating hurricanes to come through the mid-Atlantic. And I actually have been kind of stumbling across a lot of headlines about this recently. But in 1999, Hurricane Floyd came through and just wiped out, the mid-Atlantic. And obviously, there have been a lot of other hurricanes that have come through and done a lot of economic devastation. But I singled that one out because it happened sort of at the beginning of companies having access to high-speed internet capabilities and the actual beginning of the kind of the dot-com era, where we started to see telcos opening up their data centers to be used as co-locations. And that was sort of an opening opportunity for organizations to look at different ways to manage their disaster recovery plans. It was round about that time that we started seeing those co-locations being used to house like a few servers that could be used in the event of a major disaster. And very not interestingly from a fun perspective, but interesting from a corporate risk perspective, one of the areas that had a lot of those co-locations was Southern Virginia, especially along Route 58 between Chesapeake and like Danville, right? So, and that's actually, we see a lot of new data centers in that same space operated by a lot of big players. But back then, they were principally viewed as being DR sites. And when Floyd came through, some of these areas that had been chosen explicitly because they never have interesting weather were suddenly underwater. And I remember I didn't encounter it as a problem in 1999 because I wasn't yet into the corporate space. But for the next 3 or 4 years, every time I went into a new organization and talked about disaster planning, they all brought up Hurricane Floyd as being the time when they all lost everything because none of these co-locations carried flood insurance at the time, right? So it was really interesting because what we saw was this massive investment in disaster recovery and disaster preparedness suddenly running up against a scenario that wasn't in any of their playbooks. And so it's something I think about every summer when we come back to, looking at how are we ready for hurricane season. But the other reason we're talking about this right now is because Verizon also just recently released their annual, disaster recovery incident response report, right? So 100-some pages. It's a fun read. They actually enjoy the writing of it, and it's not super technical, dry stuff. But what they highlighted in there was not just the importance of being able to recover from your disaster, but something that's been very important to me as I've watched this stuff evolve, right? So one thing that those co-locations and data centers represented was an early adoption of a third party having a say in your capabilities, whether it was disaster preparedness, disaster recovery, whatever. And it struck me that, for those 3 or 4 years after that event, the one thing on everybody's mind was disaster recovery, but it was really a third party solution that was the problem that had caused this challenge for them, right? So we all want to be able to rely on third party things to manage applications, to manage, even security and risk and all these other things that are critical to managing our business. But this report really highlighted the growing amount of risk that's coming from third party and actually even fourth party integrations with our systems. It actually said that in the 2024 report, they had seen that 15% of all successful attacks, describe that how you will, originated with some sort of third-party involvement, but in the 2025 report, it was up to 30%. So literally a 100% increase year over year in third parties being involved in breaches and being part of your DR and disaster preparedness strategy. So I thought that was a really fascinating convergence of data, and it's really aligned with a lot of what we've seen in the industry realigning posture management to risk management. And so that really struck me. So, kind of the hurricane season, kind of the big challenge that we've seen with third party, and it's all kind of come together and been tied nicely together with that Verizon report that came out recently.
That makes sense. So you kind of touched on it so far, but how would you say the concept disaster recovery has changed over time then?
Well, yeah. So actually, I guess that's really the crux of it, right? So I got this marketing email just last week, right? As we were sitting down to plan this thing, I was trying to figure out like exactly how we're going to phrase this, and I got this marketing email that started with, and I have it up on my screen right now, and it started with, "Today, there's little difference between an accidental cloud outage and a premeditated cyber attack," and that was like, man, way to just gift me this content on a plate, right? And I won't name the person who sent it. You probably have it in your own inbox. You might want to check and see if it's maybe in your junk folder. But really, historically, disaster recovery was tied to outages, right? And I spent years at corporate and military facilities reviewing outage disaster plans, running through simulations and doing all that stuff. But as we've moved more to cloud supported applications or even XYZ as a service applications or whatever it is that we do, we are relying more and more on third party. And so we have these additional surfaces that have to be considered in figuring out what is our DR plan. And so a lot of that has to be now planning for both the outage that the data center is underwater and also that either we or one of our trusted providers or even one of their trusted providers in a fourth party scenario is under attack. And so that's really changed the way that we couch what it is that we're preparing for. It doesn't really change the way that we recover, but it does change the things that we consider in our preparedness plans. And that's actually been really fascinating for me because, whenever I go into new environments, I would always look through what are the run books and the playbooks that you have. But then the very first thing I would do after establishing that we had some sort of rudimentary disaster plan was I would try to duplicate everything, right? And you can't really do that in the same way that we did back then. But some of my earliest efforts at both the government and also in commercial enterprise would be to go into the server room, map all the data connections, duplicate everything, load balance everything where I could, and even identify aging servers that could be added into some sort of a clustered pool, right? So if an application went down, I could fail things over and work on things. And as a result of that, our actual disasters that we faced were not massively consequential, right? So we offloaded disaster recovery to disaster preparedness. And it was a very intentional choice. And I think what a lot of organizations are doing by investing in cloud solutions is making that same choice, if not with the exact same logic, certainly with the same outcome. The idea that, I'm putting this into a facility where maybe it's a server, but it's going to be replicated across 3 separate racks, and maybe there's geo redundancy. And so I'm investing in these automatically redundant resources without having to do all of that staging and all of that building on my own.
Yeah. Well, that's important to think about because, even if there's companies based in areas that don't typically experience natural disasters, they do have to think about, those that they're involved with that would, cause major outages if something were to happen.
Sure.
So, of course,
Yeah.
once a disruption happens, it's too late to start planning. So that's why we need to start thinking about it beforehand, making sure that your team can to keep working, data stays protected, and your customers are staying confident in your services and won't expect you to go down either.
Yeah. So, I mean, you just touched on it, and that was one of the questions I had on my list for you. Was how are you on the sales side, right, seeing organizations changing their relationship with DR, right? So I see it on the preparedness side from the engineering perspective, but on the sales side, what are you seeing as more of the way that organizations are approaching DR when they engage with us?
Yeah, I mean, for someone especially who isn't really sure where to start either, it's just I say start small. You don't need to have a 100-page, plan on day one. Just begin by identifying your most critical systems and the data that your team can't function without. From there, we can build a plan that fits your size and your goals. But the important thing is just to start the conversation. So, something is better than nothing, of course. But a lot of organizations that we're talking to are kind of taking a fresh look at how their Microsoft 365 data is protected. So they want to make sure that things like Teams chat, OneDrive files, and emails are also covered. We're seeing more demand for Azure Site Recovery, especially from the clients who want a cloud-based backup strategy for their on-prem systems. And then for those just getting started, we're helping with readiness assessments and tabletop exercises to identify gaps before anything goes wrong.
So those tabletops, actually, I really enjoy getting to participate in those. When I was coming along, we didn't really have that as an option, and we spent time at the government running simulations, and those I think were an evolution of war games. We didn't sit down in a room and discuss, these servers are gone. We got an envelope that we had to cut open, and it told us who on the team was. It was a little gruesome, right? We had a simulation where there had been a fire in the server room, and our director of IT was killed in the fire, and we had to run through that simulation and do all the playbooks, and it was in a simulation. Not everybody knows that it's a simulation, and that was a little bit weird for some folks,
intense.
Right? And it got particularly weird when the director would walk through saying, "Don't notice me, I'm not here," and then people were like, "Wait a minute, what's going on?" So the tabletops have been a really powerful improvement in the way that we've not only just been able to like identify the gaps in our BCDR playbooks, but also to envision new ways to address challenges, right? And to also identify like where we might even bring in additional third parties to augment our capabilities. And that's been really powerful to see folks realize, hey, I don't have a relationship right now with a cyber insurance provider. I don't have a relationship right now with law enforcement, right? And to be able to leverage those tabletop exercises in a very safe environment to identify those and to start having conversations at least about how to plug those gaps. So you also said though that we're seeing organizations approach this and really invest in this without having a major outage. I will tell you quite candidly, most of the places that I have spent time at didn't see disaster recovery as being a priority until they had an outage. and it was a hard conversation to have. Um, at again one of my prior locations about why they needed to give me additional servers to help build up against the risk of an outage. So how do you have that conversation? Is this something that we're taking to customers, or is it something that customers are bringing to us? How are we handling or hearing even the positioning of DR against the cost of IT overall?
Yeah. Well, I would say a lot of the times it's like that comes up in conversation, and a customer will say, well, I know we really should probably talk about that and have a plan in place. So I think you're right in that most organizations don't necessarily plan for it until something does happen, and hopefully that's something minor. But it's definitely something that we try to be proactive about, because the cost of data loss, you really have to take a look at that and see how much can you lose, before it becomes a major issue.
Yeah. Yeah, and I know that, even if we just keep this in the Microsoft lane, right, there are a lot of great products in the Microsoft portfolio aligned to recovery capabilities, right? So you've already mentioned Azure Site Recovery, and we were a very early practitioner in Azure Site Recovery capabilities and Azure Backup as well. And I know we've had some fantastic customer success stories where even ransomware may have been involved, and the customers were able to just be like, I'm not worried about that. I've got, the machine available in ASR, and just recovered it back to an on-premises service or server. We're able to layer in Azure backup data right back on top and get back up and running. And I know we've had some great success stories both with that and also with Microsoft 365 Backup, which is a pretty recent offering, I believe. It's only been around for a couple of years. But I was just looking through the stats for that like this morning, and it turns out you can do up to 1,000 SharePoint sites, OneDrive for Business, repositories, or even Exchange Online mailboxes at speeds ranging from 1 to 3 terabytes per hour, which is insane, right? And actually, you can go back all the way back to a year, right? And that's important too, because a lot of what kind of makes people move or think that maybe they don't need a DR plan for those workloads is those user-driven capabilities to go back up to 3 weeks or up to a month, up to whatever it is that the service offers directly to the user as a soft delete recovery capability. But now being able to, as an admin, go back a full year and just do bulk restores, I know has actually also been very powerful for some of our customers. And then very recently, we also got Windows backup for organizations. And I struggled with finding the positioning for this. And then Microsoft decided to announce end of life for Windows 10. And that's coming up in just, 3 months right now, I think,
Yeah.
coming up in October of this year. And part of what that service is giving you the ability to do is actually take settings that exist on a machine that needs to get upgraded and back it up and restore it back onto a machine once a user's at Windows 11, so that they can have that continuity of operations. So we have products for the recovery side aligned to the full data center capabilities with Azure Site Recovery that allow you to either recover back to on-premises or into the cloud. And we see that as being like one of the easiest vehicles that has ever been leveraged for migrating servers into Azure. Then M365 backup for the core workloads, and then Windows backup. And between the three of them, there's not a lot of gaps that are left. But I do want to take a moment. I do want to take a moment. And I have seen a lot of backup and recovery solutions that have come along over the years. And I do not want to make anybody think that you don't need a DR plan and you don't need a DR solution. You do. But I've heard a lot of organizations pitch their DR products by saying, what are you going to do when the cloud goes down? And to my delight, I always turn that back and say, what are you going to do when the cloud goes down? Because what are you planning to do with that data you've backed up if there's no cloud to recover it to? Most of these capabilities don't allow you to take like an Exchange Online mailbox and funnel it back into something on-prem that hasn't existed there for years, right? You're waiting for the cloud to come back up just as much as we are. But again, I guess that also goes back to then the cloud is now part of your third-party risk, right? Um, and that's again part of the conversation that we're talking about today is that management of third-party risk, right? And so that's something that I've been very eagerly watching or very excitedly watching change over time. Not so much the 30% of attacks starting there, but the fact that we rely so much on third and fourth party solutions to create the environments that our users consider to be their operating environment today, right? So with that, I really want to talk a little bit about what is a third party, right? And I mentioned at the beginning, right, the data centers all across the southern part of Virginia were some of those early third-party solutions. But obviously, any cloud solution is not something that you can go and hug. You can't hug a server; it's a third party, right? But the question comes up then, what constitutes third party? And Sarah, what are you seeing as being like third party in environments that we're facing today?
Yeah, well, I think you could include shadow IT and shadow AI in that list. Anything else that Adrian that you would add, maybe vendors or apps or XYZ as a service?
Yeah, actually, and I think that's a pretty decent summation of the third party risk landscape, right? So yeah, we started years ago by talking about shadow IT, right? And that was something that every vendor out there rushed to create a CASB solution, right? Cloud App Security Broker, but ironically, those are also a third-party solution, right? So it's shadow IT. It's evolved very quickly into shadow AI, and there's a lot of risk around how to make sure that your data stays your data as it gets fed into these solutions. But you're right. Also, these XYZ as a service, whether it's DR as a service or infrastructure as a service or whatever, these are also third-party solutions, and it's really important before you sign a contract with these organizations that you understand what their capabilities and responsibilities are to you in both disaster preparedness and also disaster recovery. And you mentioned shadow IT, shadow AI, and XYZ as a service, but like there's also things like brokerages, right? And we see this pretty regularly in the financial sector, where a big bank may do a ton of business and they may have a ton of employees, but they're not always actually going to be the target for attack, because ultimately they're going to have to rely on some sort of a brokerage, and those organizations are traditionally much smaller, and they operate under that size radar of we're too small to be attacked. But those are the organizations that tend to represent a lot of the third party risk that we see for organizations. So it's a combination of all of those things, right? It's products in the cloud, it's services in the cloud, it's vendors that you work with, and what's really been fascinating about watching that specific conversation grow. We have a local organization, RVA Tech, and they put together quarterly breakfasts. And one I attended last year. It was like November, I think, of last year, and they had the conversation around managing third-party risk, and their sole focus in that conversation was vendors, right? Not even solutions, not as a service, not shadow, whatever, just vendors. And there were two local companies that got up on the stage and talked about having to support and understand the risk brought to them by tens of thousands of vendors, everything from landscaping to facilities management to HVAC, right? And we all remember the big Target breach years ago that came in through their HVAC provider, right? And so understanding the risk that all of these organizations layer into your exposure is critical, and it can't be ignored, right? It can't just be that we focus on the applications our users have access to, but it also has to be, where do we extend our identity? Do we allow them to come into our team's environment? Do we allow them to use B2B, access through Entra, right? How do we expose our corporate secrets to these organizations, and how do we vet those organizations to ensure that they are not introducing unnecessary risk. And there's some great third party, right? There's some great third party tools designed explicitly to help manage these risks for organizations. And I know we have a relationship with one of them where they actually will go in and give you reporting on any company and their security exposure. But it's important that you have the ability to layer all of that into some sort of a unified view, right? And so again, bringing it back to the conversations of like, what are the Microsoft tools that allow you to manage this? If I align these to the things that you've mentioned, right? So Shadow IT, right? And the CASB solution. This was Microsoft's Cloud App Security, which is now Defender for Cloud Apps, which gives you the ability to not just discover the applications that your users are using, but also define some guardrails for how those applications can be used. We're also seeing a significant uptick in using app governance to detect OAuth consents. And this is another emerging area where third parties can bring a lot of risk to your organization, right? You see it all the time when you're using your Facebook login or your Gmail login or whatever, and you go to a third-party website and it asks you, hey, do you want to just log in with Google? And you're like, cool, yeah. And it says, well, do you want to also give me access to see all of your contacts and your phone number and your birthday and your pet's first name, right? Those consents can also expose your corporate data when users take their intra credentials into other applications. And there's built-in tooling to help identify where those things are happening and track them, and also give you, the administrator, the ability to say, we want to have this for everyone, and change a user-based consent to an admin consent, or to just revoke it, right? And all of that aligns up underneath Defender for Cloud Apps. We're seeing some massive investment in Intra to actually move some of the application management directly into there, which you're going to see it with API permissions is where we're going to track the consent. So that's an Intra side. We also then have Shadow AI, right? And you mentioned that one, and that's becoming a really fascinating conversation around augmenting your existing governance, risk, and compliance conversations. So most of what we have available to help manage Shadow AI falls under Microsoft's Purview toolset. And we did a big webinar just a few months ago where we talked about all the changes that have come to Purview. And actually, I spent a lot of time in that one talking about records management and data security posture management for AI. But Shadow AI, it requires that you have visibility into the types of data, that you have the ability to classify your data, define sensitivity and who should be able to gain access to it, define encryption, make sure that your DLP policies are able to ensure that users can't copy paste data that would give away the crown jewels of your organization to ChatGPT to train its model, right? So all of those Shadow AI capabilities and detections and controls are going to live under the Purview umbrella. And then we also have Defender External Attack Surface Management. And this one is another one. We did a webinar on this a few years ago. I even did a video out riding my bike talking about what the capabilities are with that one. But it allows you to see your organization as the world sees your organization, looking at what endpoints you may have exposed, what cloud services you may be reliant on, what top vulnerabilities are visible from the internet. But you can also use it to vet your third parties. I don't think that's its recommended purpose, and I think you could easily run into some cost challenges with that. But it does give you that ability to look at pretty much any organization and understand what they look like from an attractiveness to attackers perspective. And then you can make some decisions on whether or not, whether or not you want to be in business with them. This is one of the things that has saved me and hurt me in my career over the years, is whenever I want to buy a third-party solution and I sit down face-to-face with the person for the first time, I say, can you show me a data flow of how you move my data, how that works? And it's very, very rare that an organization has that available for you to consume. So using another tool like external attack surface management or even the third-party solution security scorecard, just to get a sense of who they are, what they're able to do, right? And it gives you a corporate view very similar to what Defender for Cloud Apps gives you from an app view perspective. And then you can take all of this and bundle it all up into the I guess it's not even all that new anymore, exposure management in the Defender portal, right? Which consumes all of the stuff we've talked about, including it now actually has support for if you use a third-party vulnerability tool like Qualys or Tenable or Rapid7, you can actually directly ingest that and align the risks that you're worried about to specific threat profiles like business email compromise, ransomware, and all that kind of stuff. Or you can align it to specific attack or threat actors out in the wild, right? So as you know, some typhoon, snowstorm, whatever Microsoft's current nomenclature is for attackers, when those become bigger, right? Microsoft will correlate all their TTPs, put it into this threat actor profile, and you can actually grade your own defenses and your disaster preparedness against what that threat actor is out there doing. So we have honestly, a lot of capabilities that are honestly just right inside the Microsoft 365 tool set to manage both risk and disaster preparedness and recovery. So it has changed a lot, but I kind of feel like we're in a position right now, and corresponding nicely with this Verizon report, where we can identify most of the major risks that our organizations face from a data perspective and layer those protections right in. So it's kind of a really neat time.
Yeah, I would agree with that for sure. And it's really crazy to think about how quickly you become reliant on multiples and multiples of different third parties that have your data and are using your data. And it happens really quickly without realizing. So, even more important to at least start the conversation and have a plan in place.
Absolutely.
So I've got.
Oh, okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Nope, you go ahead.
All right. What advice do you give? Right. I think you mentioned start small, but what advice do you personally offer up to folks who say that they're not sure where to start? Right. Because I've obviously mentioned a myriad of tools and mentioned we've discussed a myriad of different risks. Right. Where do you start? Where do you recommend people start?
Yeah, I mean, it's really not a one size fits all solution. So, here at Synergy, we're going to figure out where you are today and build on that. So, we work with organizations to understand their specific risks and goals. It's going to be different across each industry, whether you support customers or you don't. We bring a lot of depth when it comes to Microsoft technologies, and we've done these projects across different industries, so we know how to make it practical and how to make it make sense for you and your organization. And again, just starting where you are. If you've never had a conversation about it, if you're a couple layers in, that's where we're going to begin.
Awesome. And I mean, why us?
Well, we've got a lot of expertise in this area. As you can see, Adrian has a ton of knowledge around all of this. So, we've been doing this for, like I said, almost 15 years, and we see this every day. We just had a conversation about this with a client a few days ago who used Azure Site Recovery. So something we're really passionate about, and it's very important to make sure that we have this. So I do have one last question for you, Adrian. I think this is more of the interesting question. So what is the worst disaster recovery scenario that you've faced?
So there's a saying, experience is something you don't have until right after you need it. And I've gone through a few, right? I mean, nobody who's ever been a sysadmin can say they haven't experienced a disaster or two. But I will say, most of the disasters that I have faced came after I'd had an opportunity to evaluate the environment. And that doesn't mean that I closed all the holes, but in most cases, I spent so much time preparing for the worst that when it happened, it really felt like it was just part of the job. But I will never forget one night at the government where something happened happened that just wasn't in our playbooks. We had never prepared for it. We had no idea of how to deal with it, and we actually had no tools possible to use to bring to bear on it. And it just so happened that one other person in a completely different department had access to something that they were able to log into and kick off the most convoluted restore process I have ever been involved with. And I mean, the postmortems on this were lengthy. And it was quite shocking that no one was walked out the door as a result of it. But I feel like I'm probably not alone in saying that, like, you really remember one. It wasn't a ransomware. It wasn't anything like that you'd expect from a third party solution. It wasn't anything that that I even could have controlled. It wasn't even an admin error, right? It was related to a certificate authority and a reminder email that never got delivered because the person who would have received it was no longer there. So there's elements to your planning that have to take into account the tools that you have, the people that you have, the playbooks that you have, and then it's really, really, really important that you not check your own work. And I can't stress that enough, because if we had somebody else check our work on that, they would have been identified. And like not to downplay the event, but like I've been at an organization that dealt with a ransomware event, and it just wasn't an event because the playbooks were adequate, right? I've been in scenarios where servers have been down all night long, but we had I just learned the Marines apparently have an acronym called PACE, right? Primary, alternate, contingency, and then emergency. So we ran through our primary, our alternate, and our contingency, and at 4:30 in the morning we ran our emergency, and it worked, right? But in this scenario that was completely accidentally recovered, I wouldn't even consider that to have fallen into any of those stages. So it's really important to have someone just look at your plan, if nothing else, right? Just look at it and say, maybe you've missed a couple things here. This looks really well developed. And then periodically go through that process again, because the technologies that you use will change. The vendors that you use will change, which means that it's really important that you revisit and stay on top of, what you have. And to bring it all back to the hurricane in 1999, it wasn't just that the data center was underwater. It was, again, also that the data center operator didn't have flood insurance. So there was no recovery, right? It was just gone. So that's something really important to consider when you're looking at how does all this stuff fit together? What are my long-term plans? What is my risk, and how do I manage it?
Yeah, and that's a great point about having a second set of eyes read over your plan, because if you're reading an email that you've read 50 times, you're not going to catch any mistakes that you made. So that is super important.
Yeah. Well, that's all the questions I had for you, Sarah. Unless you've got anything else for me, I think I'm happy to give people a few minutes of their afternoon back to enjoy their lunch. But I know that this hurricane conversation doesn't really apply to you, and I realized that halfway through this that Sarah is not with me in the studio, and I am actually not in the studio because Sarah is in a completely different part of the nation, one that probably deals with different weather events that may be potentially impactful, but not hurricanes. So
yeah, we don't deal with hurricanes here in the Midwest, but that doesn't mean that we don't need to prepare for disaster.
Fair enough. All right. Well, thank you for joining us today. Sarah, again, it's been a delight to have you as an addition to the webinar team. I look forward to seeing you again on one in the future.
All right, thanks for having me.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.